The Battle of Guillemont was an attack by the Fourth Army on the village of Guillemont. The village is on the D20 running east to Combles and the D64 southwest to Montauban.Longueval and Delville Wood lie to the northwest and Ginchy to the northeast. The village was on the right flank of the British sector, near the boundary with the French Sixth Army. The Fourth Army had advanced close to Guillemont during the Battle of Bazentin Ridge, and the capture of the village was the culmination of British attacks which began on 22–23 July. The attacks were intended to advance the right flank of the Fourth Army and eliminate a salient further north at Delville Wood. German defences ringed the wood and had observation over the French Sixth Army area to the south towards the Somme River, preparatory to a general attack intended for mid-September from the Somme north to Courcelette. The French Sixth Army, the Fourth Army and Reserve Army conducted numerous attacks to capture the rest of the German Second Line and to gain observation over the German Third Line. The German defences around Guillemont were based on the remaining parts of the Second Line and numerous fortified villages and farms northwards from Hem, Maurepas and Combles to Falfemont Farm, Guillemont, Ginchy, Delville Wood and Highwood, which commanded the ground in between. Numerous attempts were made by Joseph Joffre, Sir Douglas Haig, Ferdinand Foch and the army commanders Henry Rawlinson and Emile File to coordinate joint attacks, which failed due to the recovery of the German Second Army from the disorganization caused by the defeats in early July. Disagreements over tactics by Haig and Joffre in July and August and organizational constraints caused by congestion behind the front, roads and tracks obliterated by Anglo-French artillery fire becoming swamps when it rained and increasing German artillery fire on targets behind the front line. Inexperienced, unreliable machinery, guns and ammunition and an unpredictable flow of supplies from Britain reduced the effectiveness of the British armies. Difficulty in coordinating attacks by the Allied armies and the large number of piecemeal attacks resorted to by the British have been criticized as costly failures and evidence of muddle and incompetence by Haig and Rawlinson. The French 6th and 10th armies had similar difficulties and severe strain had been put on the German 2nd and 1st armies, forcing them into a similar piecemeal defense. Wilfred Miles noted in The History of the Great War that the defense of Guillemont was judged by some observers to be the best performance of the war by the German army on the Western Front. A pause at the end of August in Anglo-French attacks to organize bigger combined attacks and postponements for bad weather coincided with the largest counter-attack yet by the German army in the battle. Joffre, Foch and Haig abandoned attempts to organize large combined attacks in favor of sequenced army attacks, and the capture of the German defenses from Celles-Écoutaouy north of the Somme to Guillemont from 3 to 6 September brought the French 6th and British 4th armies onto ground which overlooked the German 3rd position. Rain, congestion and relief of tired divisions then forced a pause in French attacks until the 12th of September. In the Battle of Ginchy, the Fourth Army captured the village, ready for the Battle of Flers-Courcelette. Background: strategic developments. On the 1st of July, the Anglo-French offensive had captured the first German defensive line, from Foucaulcourt on the south bank to the vicinity of the Albert Bapaume Road, north of the Somme. The German Second Army abandoned the second line on the south bank in the 17th Corps area to occupy a shorter line behind it close to Péronne. Despite the policy of an unyielding defense, the chief Chief of Staff General Major Grunert was sacked by Falkenhayn that night and replaced by Colonel von Lossberg. Next day General von Below issued a secret order. The ground must be held at all costs. Defensive positions were to be recovered by counter-attacks, and that all commanders must make it clear that the enemy must be made to pick his way forward over corpses. Over the next 10 days, 15 fresh divisions were sent to the Somme front, the first being split up as they arrived and used piecemeal to fill gaps at the most vulnerable points, which led to many losses in the reinforcing units. The Second Army lost 40,187 casualties in the first 10 days, compared to 25,989 men in the first 10 days at Verdun. On the 17th of July, Falkenhayn reorganized the 20 German divisions engaged on the Somme, by re-establishing the First Army under the command of Below, north of the Somme, and appointing Lieutenant General Max von Gallwitz to the command of the Second Army south of the river, combining both armies in Army Gruppe Gallwitz-Somme. On the 17th of July, Below issued another secret order, noting that unauthorized withdrawals were still being made and threatened to court-martial commanders who did not fight to the last man. By the end of July, despite the discipline and sacrifice of the German troops, more ground had been lost, and Gallwitz issued an order on the 30th of July, stating that the decisive battle of the war was being fought on the Somme and that no more ground should be given up, regardless of losses. In August, the Germans retained far more ground than in July, at a cost of c. 80,000 casualties. On the 6th of July, Joffre had visited Fayol and discussed bringing the cavalry close to the front to exploit success, and on the 8th of July, Foch, commander of Groupe d'Armées du Nord, ordered Fayol to reinforce the success of the corps south of the Somme for an attack on the 20th of July, while defending on the north of the river. After the British victory on the 14th of July, Joffre directed Foch to coordinate broad front attacks with the British, who were making the main Allied effort to force the Germans to spread their artillery fire and infantry over a wider front. Foch ordered the attack to be extended to the north of the river, although the transfer of artillery had put the main weight of the attack on the south side. After the success of the Battle of Bazentin Ridge 14–22 July, British Expeditionary Force General Headquarters received intelligence reports of demoralization and confusion among the German defenders, but a recovery was noted within 3 days, particularly due to improvements in the flow of supplies to the German front line. By the end of July, there was no expectation of a rapid German collapse, as the defenders north of the Somme had been relieved by 3 times as many fresh divisions, and the Fourth Army was ordered to prepare for a German counterattack. Intelligence reports showed very high German casualties, and that one of the fresh German divisions had previously lost 104% of its infantry strength at Verdun. Below's order for unyielding defense was captured in late July, which indicated that German tactics were making attrition a feasible Allied objective. The destruction of British intelligence networks in northern France and Belgium restricted BEF intelligence to gleaning documents from the battlefield and prisoner interrogation, causing an underestimation of the number of German divisions available for the Somme front. On the 2nd of August, Haig issued a directive stating that Falkenhayn could continue to replace troops on the Somme and a German collapse was not expected, forecasting a wearing-out battle until September. Anglo-French intelligence estimates of German casualties ranged from 130,000–175,000, passes in July. After another relief of German divisions in mid-August, reports of despondency among prisoners, and estimate that the British had engaged 23 of the 41 German divisions which had fought on the Somme, which were worn out after 4.5 days, yet kept in the line for 20 days. News of German peace feelers and mounting domestic unrest raised Allied optimism again. At the end of August, the Romanian declaration of war and the sacking of Falkenhayn led to hopes that his replacement by Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg as Chief of the General Staff and General Erich Ludendorff as First Quartermaster General would lead to more emphasis on the Eastern Front, easing the task of the Allied armies in France and Belgium. Allied advances in early September and publication of German casualty lists for July, showing that 7 of 12 German divisions on the Somme opposite the British had lost more than 50% of their infantry, encouraged Haig and Joffre to persist with the offensive. Bavarian units in the area around Guillemont were believed to have maintained high morale but suffered many casualties and had few reserves available. Tactical developments. A vast increase in British war production had been achieved in 1916, but the flow of equipment and ammunition caused transport problems in France, particularly on the Chemins-de-Fer du Nord railways, which had become overloaded by the increase in the size of the BEF, the large number of ammunition trains from the Channel ports to the Somme front, and the need to move unprecedented numbers of casualties after the 1st of July. Congestion of the railways began to affect operations in July, and rainy periods made delivery of ammunition from railheads to gun positions much harder. When 550 lorry loads were being delivered even on quiet days, shortages of heavy howitzer ammunition in mid-July were made worse in areas under German observation and harassing fire, as more German artillery arrived on the Somme front. After the 1st of July, work began on extensions of the railway main line behind the Somme front towards Maricourt, and the meter gauge line from Albert to Bray was extended to Fricourt and Montauban by the 14th of July. Anglo-French conferences on railway policy on 15 and the 18th of June settled administrative questions on railway building, addition of extensions to lines and the building of all-weather connecting roads. Operation of the extensions proved difficult due to the number of soldiers, lorries, wagons and guns crisscrossing the rear of the battlefront, and road closures due to accidents and German bombardment, which made the delivery of supplies unpredictable. From 1 to 11 July, the 13th Corps Artillery received 77 guns to replace 65 which were out of action due to defects and lack of spare parts. The supply of ammunition was adequate, but much of it was of poor quality. Fuses from heavy howitzer shells falling out in flight. On the 31st of July, Rawlinson concentrated the artillery of 13th Corps on the right flank against Guillemont, and then a line from Allouze Wood to Ginchy, with assistance from the 15th Corps Artillery. On the 3rd of August, the British armies received a directive from Haig, which laid down the methods to be adopted to capture all of the Morville-Thiepval Ridge. As it was clear that the German defense had become more formidable, methodical preparation of small attacks with immediate consolidation was required, and great economy of men and equipment necessary to conduct another general attack in mid-September. The French 20th Corps was to be assisted by the capture of Falfemont Farm, Loos Wood, Guillemont and Ginchy. Rawlinson altered the 13th Corps boundary to concentrate it against Guillemont, and the 55th and 2nd Divisions sapped forward to reduce the width of no man's land, which brought the British front line to Arrowhead Copse and about halfway from Trones Wood to of Guillemont. The two German armies on the Somme made corps headquarters permanent geographical entities, with divisions temporarily attached, before relief by fresh formations. On the south bank, Group Cost was formed from the 17th Reserve Corps. Eventually the area north of the Somme to the Ancre was held by Group Goslar from the Somme to Hardecourt, Group 6th Namen from Hardecourt to Pozières on the Albert Bapaume Road, and Group Stein from Pozières across the Ancre to Gommecourt. On the 2nd of July, Losberg surveyed the battlefield near Péronne, then began to arrange defensive positions like those used in the Second Battle of Champagne in September 1915. Frontline positions were to be thinly held, maintained regardless of loss, and recaptured by Gegenstoss. If immediate counter-attacks failed, Gegenangriff were to be made. Losberg ordered a new telephone line to be built, parallel to the front line out of artillery range, with branches to forward headquarters, ordered artillery headquarters to move close to infantry division headquarters to improve liaison, and moved artillery observation posts back from the front line to positions which overlooked it. Lack of reserves was the chief difficulty of the defense, and Losberg urged Falkenhayn to end the Battle of Verdun to supply reinforcements, for as long as German attacks continued at Verdun, troops, supplies and equipment arrived on the Somme intermittently, forcing piecemeal reinforcement of weak spots by battalions and companies, rather than complete units from a settled echelon of reserves, which caused irreplaceable losses in divisions kept in the line for too long. German infantry began to avoid trench lines in mid-July and occupied shell holes, which made Allied bombardments less effective and diverted infantry into mopping-up operations. Allied attacks on limited objectives reduced the effectiveness of German defensive dispersal. Positions were incessantly bombarded, trenches, barbed wire and dugouts disappearing as far back as the second line. Shell-hole positions about 20 yards apart, containing 2 or 3 men, were quickly overrun by Anglo-French infantry and prepared for defense. Before a Gegenstoss could be made, deliberate counter-attacks were planned, but most were cancelled due to shortages of troops, artillery and ammunition. Attempts to connect shell-hole positions during quiet periods failed, as Allied air reconnaissance quickly directed artillery fire onto them. Trenches were evacuated before attacks, which began the development of defended areas, in which small groups maneuvered to deprive Allied gunners of recognizable targets, vastly inflating the amount of ammunition necessary for bombardments.